This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's March 24th, 2025. 100 years ago today, Tennessee Governor Austin Peay signed the Butler Act. That was a law that outlawed the teaching of evolution in Tennessee schools. Or as the law itself put it, quote, to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals. Violations were to be treated as a misdemeanor, punishable by a fine between $100 and $500. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Passage of the Butler Act led to one of the most legendary events in Tennessee history, the Scopes monkey trial. A high school teacher in the small town of Dayton named John Scopes agreed to be a test case by admitting to teaching from materials that acknowledged evolution. He was charged with a violation. And as the ACLU came to his defense, a pair of nationally famous attorneys moved in to argue the case. Clarence Darrow acting as defense lawyer, William Jennings Bryan for the prosecution. Ultimately, the core question of whether or not Scopes had violated the law on the books was resolved with the simple truth that yes, he had. But aside from that, the trial became the place where a national debate on creationism versus evolution was held. And the whole exercise triggered a new wave of careful thought about who gets to decide what is taught in schools and where the line is drawn between fact and belief. We are clearly in a new era of disagreement about that last topic. In some ways, it's at the heart of President Trump's move last week to begin dismantling the Department of Education. But I've got to say, some of the talking points I'm hearing about that seem to be based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what kind of role the DOE plays. The thing that some folks don't seem to have straight is that the Federal Education Department does not set curriculum at all. It doesn't decide what's taught. It mostly deals with money. The DOE manages student aid programs for college students, like Pell Grants, work study, federal student loans, and it provides about 10% of the funding spent on K-12 schools. A lot of that comes through Title I programs to help low-income kids, and IDEA, which provides resources for students with disabilities. It also collects a lot of data that's used to understand the needs of American students and how our educational system is working. A big part of that is NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, aka the nation's report card. That tracks student achievement across the nation, but also factors like poverty levels and trends in attendance. It actually predates the DOE, but once the old Office of Education was upgraded to a department, administering the NAEP became one of its responsibilities. The department also enforces the various federal laws that pertain to schools. A lot of those are measures that bar various forms of discrimination in schools. And none of that includes deciding what gets taught. Now, some would say the federal government did start heading in that direction during George W. Bush's administration. That was the era of No Child Left Behind, a presidential push to tell states how and when to test students and hold states accountable if student test scores didn't reach certain benchmarks. I started my journalism career as that was really getting up and running, and I remember reporting story after story on the confusion here in Tennessee over how to comply, how to revamp our testing, whether we were impossibly out of line with other states. It was a mess. The feds still weren't setting curriculum, but that framework did trigger a lot of questions about what kind of a state curriculum would be necessary to make the whole testing piece work out okay. After that came the attempt at a course correction with the Every Student Succeeds Act. President Obama signed it into law, and it's often associated with his administration. But it was actually sponsored by a Tennessee Republican, Senator Lamar Alexander. He had also been Secretary of Education under the first President Bush, and when Alexander was Tennessee's governor in the 80s, he'd had a big focus on school reform with an attempt to incentivize teachers to perform well called Career Ladder. So education was a major topic for him. The Every Student Succeeds Act tried to keep some of the testing requirements of No Child Left Behind, but it stripped out some of the earlier law's more prescriptive elements that crept into, shall we say, curriculum suggestion. It made it very clear that deciding what is and is not taught is absolutely a matter for the states. And it added yet another money role for the federal DOE, creating a path for the department to award grants that could be used to pay for the work of planning out necessary improvements to the way that districts and schools are held accountable. All of that ultimately leaves the most crucial decisions about what Tennessee students learn in the hands of the Tennessee Department of Education. The state administers standardized exams. It sets the curriculum standards that teachers have to meet. It approves textbooks for use in public schools. It determines who can and cannot be a teacher. And just like in 1925, when the Butler Act outlawed teaching evolution, Tennessee's lawmakers can pass measures that get into the mix of either requiring or barring schools and teachers from certain kinds of lessons. We saw that happen in 2021 when the General Assembly passed a law limiting how issues around racism can be handled in the classroom. In just a few minutes, a look at a long-running literary magazine based just down the road in Sewanee. That's coming up after the newscast.
You know how important WPLN News has been to you and your family, and you have seen how high-quality local journalism is necessary to a thriving community. You can ensure that this service stays strong and stays available to all of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Join the Producers Circle with your gift of $100 or more each month and make the bold statement that you support the mission of a more informed and engaged community. Start your philanthropic journey with Nashville Public Radio today at WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. The push by Tennessee Republicans to defy Supreme Court precedent and deny free public schooling for undocumented students is scheduled for a key hearing this week. The state Senate's Finance, Ways and Means Committee will hear one of multiple bills on Tuesday. Protesters have been making their objections well known. That includes at a recent protest in Memphis, where Mexican migrant activist Jose Salazar told WKNO that the proposal goes after school children to punish their parents.
I mean, this is inhumane. Education is not a privilege, it's a human right, and it's not up for negotiation.
Republican leaders have been open about their desire to defy a 1982 Supreme Court ruling that says states cannot constitutionally deny a free public education based on immigration status. State lawmakers are considering the creation of a Foster Youth Bill of Rights. This would be a document that lays out what children in DCS custody are entitled to, including the right to go to school and receive health care services. They also have the right to be free from punishment that restricts contact with a guardian or attorney. 19-year-old Ella Brennan tells WPLN's This Is Nashville that she wrote the draft legislation herself shortly after aging out of the foster care system.
So when I was in foster care, I did not know that we had any rights, and I didn't know how to look for them. And the goal is to make it accessible to foster youth, to caseworkers, and to everyone else who is involved with the youth, so that they are empowered to know their rights and call out violations of their rights.
The bill is going before a state Senate committee this week. If it eventually passes, DCS would have to train employees on these rights and distribute age-appropriate materials to foster youth every year. You can listen to the full conversation with Brennan on This Is Nashville today at noon. Tennesseans with Ukrainian heritage stood side by side with soldiers outside of Fort Campbell this weekend at a rally to support Ukraine and to remember the 6 U.S. military volunteers who lost their lives fighting for the country. Mark Carey, a military volunteer from Nashville, tells News Channel 5 that he's been volunteering since the beginning of the war. He leaves for his 9th trip to the battlefield next week. Ukraine has seen a lapse in support from U.S. President Donald Trump. Carey says that if America does not show its commitment to freedom abroad, more atrocities will happen, like the abuse of women and children in Ukraine. In another demonstration, protesters gathered at Tesla dealerships across Tennessee over the weekend, unhappy with the cuts Elon Musk has made through Doge. Franklin, Chattanooga, and Bartlett all saw demonstrators in coordination with a national effort to push back against the large-scale layoffs Musk has spearheaded. Members of Indivisible Tennessee, a group that organized the Franklin protest, tell WSMV there's a way to cut fraud that does not dismantle whole government programs. Counter-protesters say that Trump was transparent about how he intended to employ Musk before the election, and the majority still came out to vote for him. Nashville is suing the Trump administration over federal funding disruptions. WPLN's Cynthia Abrams reports Metro has joined 6 cities and 11 nonprofits in a lawsuit led by the Southern Environmental Law Center.
Different cities have different concerns. San Diego's suing over money to plant trees. Madison needs the federal dollars to make homes more energy efficient. For Metro, it's $14 million worth of transportation grants, prompting them to join. This money was supposed to fund new citywide electric vehicle charging stations and could build bike lanes across East Nashville. If the lawsuit is unsuccessful, both projects could be in jeopardy. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
Nashville has more than the $14 million at stake in this lawsuit. Many metro departments could soon see cuts. MNPS is at risk of losing more than $100 million. The family of Riley Strain, the 22-year-old tourist found dead in the Cumberland River last March, has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the fraternity he'd been drinking with on the night of his death. The Tennessean reports that Strain, a student from the University of Missouri, had traveled to Nashville as part of his frat's 2024 spring formal. The suit alleges that the Delta Chi fraternity violated its own policy of not serving drinks above 15% alcohol by volume. State investigators determined that Strain was not visibly drunk or overserved at Luke's 32 Bridge Bar, where he was last seen on the night he went missing. His blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit when he died, according to the medical examiner. The family is seeking damages and compensation for funeral and medical expenses. Measles has come to Tennessee. The state confirmed its first case of the year on Friday, and health officials say they're still investigating the source of the infection and who may have been exposed. The person was infected early this month and is recovering at home in Middle Tennessee. The case is part of a national outbreak involving more than 300 cases, and a correction to a vaccination figure that WPLN has cited in recent stories. While vaccine hesitancy has been on the rise, Tennessee kindergartners are meeting the threshold for herd immunity, according to the latest CDC figures. There's a new football coach at Tennessee State University. Reggie Barlow comes from coaching Washington, D.C.'s XFL team and previously coached at Virginia State and Alabama State universities. As a player, Barlow played on 3 NFL teams and was part of the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2002. He replaces Eddie George at the helm. Last year, for the first time in more than a decade, the TSU Tigers won the OVC Big South Conference title. The March Madness Sweet 16 will be twice as sweet for the University of Tennessee as both the men's and women's teams advanced over the weekend. The win by the men makes it their 3rd straight Sweet 16, the best run in program history. In beating UCLA, Chaz Lanier also set a UT record for the most three-pointers in a season. They'll next play Kentucky on Friday. On the women's side, the Lady Vols took down Ohio State and are headed to the Sweet 16 for a nation-leading 37th time. They'll learn their opponent today and play on Saturday. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Tennessee may not immediately be thought of as a literary hub, but there are a number of institutions here working to make that the case, including the Sewanee Review, one of the nation's longest-running literary magazines. The Review was once known for publishing the works of great Southern writers like Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner, but over the course of the 20th century, it fell into a slump. That ended a decade ago when, under new leadership, the Sewanee Review grew its annual submissions from 800 to 8,000, bringing new emerging voices into the fold. That includes writers like Kanat Kapoor. She attended Vanderbilt's prestigious MFA program and just before graduation published a story in the Sewanee Review. Within a year, she was also published in The New Yorker. Kapoor spoke to our daily show, This Is Nashville, about what getting published can mean for writers.
What is the editing process like? Is it hard or difficult? Because look, coming into news and journalism, I got to understand that's one form of editing. But this is editing prose in literature is totally something, a different beast in itself. What's that like?
Oh my gosh. Well, so emerging writers don't get to interact with editors that often. When we do, it's when we have something accepted at a journal, right, which is rare. So it is a very collaborative process, and emerging writers are often working with editors who have so much more experience. They've been in the field for a longer time. They're often much older. They've worked before with writers who, to me, would be instructors and teachers and just people I really respect. And so it's this, it's kind of this awestruck sort of strange collaborative experience where you have to sometimes fight for the things you want to keep in the piece, but also you're seeing how in each draft the sentences are better and the sort of fuzzy things have been straightened out. And it's kind of a transformative project. It almost feels like when you submit a story, it's a little stagnated, and it feels not necessarily dead, but dormant to the writer. You've taken it as far as you can, but in the editing process, it comes alive again.
Well, how did that experience help you with the New Yorker edit once you got selected for that publication?
Well, it's a very similar process. You do about 2 big drafts where you cut things and rearrange things, and then you go into line edits, which are like making the sentences better. But it really prepared me. I think when I was accepted at the Sewanee Review, I felt very sort of wide-eyed and young, and I wasn't sure how to navigate this like editor-writer relationship. But having done it once, I felt a lot more comfortable with the New Yorker.
Now, I've heard that you use the piece from Sewanee as your application process to other publications, right?
For other jobs and teaching jobs and things like that. It's my show pony piece that I use for everything. Yeah.
Well done. Well done. Okay, so answer this for me. From your experience as a writer a little bit more broadly, what is the importance of having literary magazines, a literary magazine like the Sewanee Review?
Well, for writers, the validation, we say it should come from inside. But when you're young and you're just starting out, it really does come from the outside. So just the possibility of being published in a journal sometimes feels exciting enough that, you can return to that dead piece or that piece that's not working anymore. And more widely as a reader, how wonderful that we have an artifact you can turn to and read other contemporary voices, people just like you, writing from often all over the world. I think literary magazines are like this beautiful, like cultural artifact of our society that we need to protect at all costs.
Do you think it's special that this cultural artifact has found a home here in Tennessee?
Yeah. Nashville has this amazing, bustling literary community that I don't think a lot of people know about. We have Parnassus here, and Patchett lives here. We have this wonderful MFA program at Vanderbilt. We have the Sewanee Review, the Sewanee Writers Conference. I mean, the list goes on. And the Sewanee Review, I think, is really like helping to put Nashville on that literary map. Like, this is a possible haven for artists and writers.
That was writer Kanat Kapoor speaking with our Daily Show host, Khalil Ekalona. To learn more about the Sewanee Review, its history, and the work that it's publishing today, listen to the full This Is Nashville episode at WPLN.org or in the This Is Nashville podcast feed. We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. And thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a review, or thumbs up in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does help. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.